Det här är en fågel!
Vi får slå innan iga.
Perkele, sienkofte! Bananel!
Welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, the NPR of the sensible centrist. Ludwig Path, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm doing well. So
This
very
cold
excited.
Thursday evening.
Yeah. It is a cold Thursday evening. Very excited to have Fródi on. It's probably the biggest name I think we've had on the stream ever. So it's a good way to close out the year.
Yes, this will be the next to last episode that we do this year, probably. And as Ludwig Path mentioned, Fródi, welcome on.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that I'm a big name in these circles.
Certainly one of the more, probably most exciting guests, I think, from our perspective in quite a while, in terms of being able to dig into a topic that we've been interested in looking into, but not really having any to help us or guide us through, which is the Nordic Right and its connections to paganism and sort of how these societies exist today. So first, before we get going, I just want to be a good YouTuber and shill all of my connections here. In the description down below, you will find a link to my Twitter if you want to follow me there, a link to my Telegram as well, and a link to the Matrix Element channel, which is sort of the community chat for people who enjoy our show. Ludwig Path, you have a couple of links as well.
Yes, I mean, for those who want to, you can follow me on YouTube, Telegram, or Twitter. So, I mean, it's just funny man stuff, but it's good funny man stuff, I think.
The memes are on point.
Yes.
Lastly, Fródi, for anyone who don't know who you are, where can they find you?
All right. Well, I have a channel that's mostly active on Odyssey these days. It's just GTK. My channel is called Guide to Kulchur, and Kulchur is Kulchur. It's a name of a book by Ezra Pound that the channel is named after. And so you'll find it on Odyssey. I'm on Telegram. That's probably where I'm most active with posting every day on Telegram. So that's the best place to follow me. And, well, I'm all over the place. I think that my handle on Twitter is real_GTK. So you'll find me there. And, yeah, then you'll find all the other links as well. So I think that's it.
I've left a link in the description to, I think, your website, and I'll add the Twitter handle as well, so people can find wherever they want to go from there, I guess.
Excellent.
Okay, so Ludwig Path, do you have anything you want to start off with in this discussion?
Yes, I guess it would be asking Fródi about what we call like the red pilling story. If you wanted to maybe elaborate a little bit on how you ended up in these spheres and having beliefs that is a little bit outside of the norm, like most of us here.
All right. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Well, I was born on the Faroe Islands, and as maybe not everyone listening to this knows, it's a tiny place. It's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's just about 50,000 people in total living there, and so it's very much sort of isolated in that sense from the mainland of Europe, and so I think the society is a bit different in that sense because it's small communities, small villages or towns, and I moved from the Faroe Islands to Sweden when I was a child, and the contrast is probably what sort of made me take note of all the things that I didn't like about modern society or modern liberal society, call it what you want, because the society that I had known as a child didn't really have any mass immigration. It was not, it was more, as all societies, I think, that are sort of on the countryside or outside of the urban cosmopolitan environment, it is a bit more connected to a more traditional way of living. It sounds a bit ridiculous to say that because it's, I mean, it has all kinds of modern aspects as well, but all the things that are removed from the sort of an urban life. So if you grow up in a big city, you'll usually not be connected to nature and be out in nature a lot, and animals and farming and all those kinds of things that our ancestors did, and also normal attitudes toward things like masculinity, I guess, and femininity and family and so on, because those things are really erased from the urban life and the urban bourgeois cosmopolitan life. And I guess the contrast made me feel somewhat uncomfortable. And the more I became aware of politics, I realized that if this continues, when I became a teenager and so on, if this continues, this development, then no future generation will ever experience their own countries or their own societies in a normal way, because already now, I guess, we have the sort of younger people growing up are in some towns, some cities, and schools and so on. They're already an ethnic minority. And so this is just a trajectory that I felt was objectionable. And so I guess I became involved in a, I guess, sort of subcultural or ideological way in sort of a political protest against that already as a teenager. So I've been doing this for a long time. I've been involved in one way or another for about 25 years. I guess the later half of the 90s was when I got involved. And so, yeah, I've seen a transformation both of society and of also, shall we say, the right, or whatever you want to call it. It's changed. Everything has changed a lot. And also, I would say that the society that I came from has changed a lot. And it's kind of depressing to see, I guess, how much it has changed in the last 20, 30 years. Because when I was a child, it was still very much a sort of a unique place, I guess, because it was so isolated. It's islands in the middle of the ocean, and you have to, it's a bit of a project to get there. And that, of course, has its charm, but now everything is sort of streamlined, and it has been sort of transformed in the attitudes and everything into something that is just similar to everything else. I mean, it's the same kind of social attitudes, political attitudes, and cultural attitudes about feminism and all these things that you'll find in any urban environment. So it's just a part of that now. And so I've just seen that transformation, and I think that is what has motivated me the most to be so wholeheartedly engaged in sort of a metapolitical fight against that trend, I guess. So I hope that explains it. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for a very long time, and when I started out, it was mostly sort of a very subcultural movement in the 90s, and people who have become acquainted with these ideas in later times might have a difficult time imagining what it was like, because it was subcultural. It was a lot of mostly young people and very few adults. It was essentially teenagers and sort of below 25-year-olds trying to create a political movement or protest movement against what was transforming their countries, and there were hardly any older people involved. So the generation above that was basically absent, and so what you got was basically a subcultural movement, sort of the skinhead movements, and so on. And so this things have changed a lot, both within the right, I guess. I don't like that term, but I don't know any other term that's better. So things have changed a lot within the right and also in society in general, because that's something that we'll probably get into that later. But when younger people talk to me, and this was even several years ago, when people in their early 20s talk to me and say that they've never experienced their own country in a way that I would call normal, because when they grew up, when they became sort of conscious of these things, the society had already changed so much that they already felt alienated. And I guess I'm fortunate in the sense that I had a chance to experience the contrast. And I think that has been a great advantage for me. So I hope that gives you a sort of a brief overview, and just feel free to ask me anything you want.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting because, like you said, there's so many young people out there right now who feel alienated in society, but they have like no reference points for what a healthier society would look like at all. It's just, like this sort of vague, maybe it's just a vague feeling. Maybe it's a little bit more like they've gotten into more abstract arguments for why they think it's wrong and so on, but they have no actual tangible experience for what an alternative looks like. And I assume that a lot of the hopelessness comes from there. But just a small question, like with your journey from the islands to the mainland, so to say, what was the biggest thing that you noticed that you didn't like? If there's like one difference between the like more traditional way of life that you lived and the big city cosmopolitan life.
Yeah, and I used to live not really in any like very big city, but just like moving to a city itself was a big change, I guess. And what was the biggest contrast? I guess one thing was, of course, immigration, because I had never seen a non-white or basically non-Scandinavian person before I left the Faroe Islands. Now it's different. Now there is immigration to the Faroe Islands as well. So that would not be the case for people being born there now. But of course, when I came to Sweden, I saw that it was already sort of Arabs and Middle Easterners and so on. And so that's one thing. I guess the other thing is just the sort of the urban bland attitude toward what I would call normal norms about, for example, masculinity and so on. That's like a Swedish society already then in the mainstream would already have sort of a mocking attitude toward masculinity, I guess. It's difficult to describe and explain, but I think people will get what I mean, that there is this sort of the public will sort of mock.
It was the rise of sort of the what some people call like the rootless cosmopolitan characters who look down upon the people who essentially would have built the country before them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They look down upon everyone who did all the hard work building up the country, and so I guess, and just like you said, the rootlessness, and also the sort of the lack of personality. Whereas, I mean, if you live on the countryside, if you live in a smaller community, society has more of a personality, and there's more of a connection between people. And people know each other and so on. That's probably everywhere. If you live in a smaller
really like
place.
Something that I've heard you say before, where you can't live life in the abstract. You have to exist somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a major problem of the modern world. That the modern world is so much based on abstractions and theoretical I mean, I would say that basically all the costs of living in the modern world, there are many tangible, concrete costs involved, but all the benefits are largely abstract and theoretical. And it is a very, very strange kind of alienating world that that we have to live in. But exactly, that's one of the things, that everything just becomes abstract and less relatable. So I guess the one word, of course, would be alienation. I just think that at a pretty early stage, I saw that the contrast between the countryside and the city is alienation in the city, and in more sort of urban environments and sort of bourgeois environments, that I felt very alienated from that environment and from those attitudes, and like I didn't belong. That's not me. That's not my kind of society. And it's also a sort of a how to put it, like a protection, an urge to defend the possibility of a different kind of society, so that future generations can have a chance to experience something that's normal and healthy.
So, do you think irony has played a large part in this? When I hear you talking about, the sort of mocking attitude towards masculinity, and for me, like you said, the rootlessness is a problem. But another thing, like with modern culture, especially the cosmopolitan culture, and it seems to, you get more of it the closer you get to the city centers. It's like this completely ubiquitous irony with everything, and sarcasm, and the inability to look at anything seriously, or try to play and inhabit a type of role seriously. Everything has to be at like this ironic distance, and if you break that, you're sort of not in a good company. Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's like you're supposed to play into that. You're supposed to play into irony, and not just irony. There's a and you guys will probably recognize this as well. And I think especially probably in Scandinavian society, there is this unwillingness to be too serious about politics, for example, because people will become very uncomfortable if you are serious about politics. So you have to just take, you just have to take the back seat, and you have to just talk about trivial things like football or something. Because if you talk about politics in a serious way, you become that guy, and people will sort of be uncomfortable around that.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's in especially in larger groups, the only thing you can get away with is, it's at best it's jokes about how everything is going to hell, and then we can all sort of laugh about that and try to forget it.
Yes, you laugh, notice, and you move on. I mean, for me, it seems like these late night kind of the talk shows that run in Scandinavia and Sweden. That seems to be almost the model of how dialogue and conversation is supposed to go in these these larger city areas, and everything is just supposed to be a punchline, and you're supposed to be politically correct and so on. And it's like that's the room that you have to talk about stuff. There's no room for any kind of serious existential discussion at all.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. That's how it is. And it creates a kind of a passive aggressive society where you can only communicate about these things indirectly. And I think we have these. I think that is reflected in what kind of politicians we have in top positions. I mean, if the prime ministers, the Scandinavian prime ministers, and I think the prime example of that would probably be the previous Swedish prime minister, Fredrik Reinfeldt, who to me comes across as a psychopath, a sociopath, where he has like this soft persona, but everything is extremely passive aggressive. He is like he comes across as a broken man, and he tries to assert himself or assert his will through this passive aggressive kind of weak way. And that's, I think that reflects a very unhealthy way of communication that we have in our society.
Yeah, I agree. But to another point that you talked about, like you talked about the organizations of right-wing groups in the 90s, right? And how it was basically sort of a young movement. When I think about that stuff, and I'm sort of a millennial myself, and I must have been maybe like 10 years old when I was exposed to some of these movements. And you do think about like the stereotype of, say, the movie Romper Stomper or something with Russell Crowe that you've probably seen. It's like this very sort of high-strung, high-energy, use a lot of symbolism from like this kind of mid-century German symbolism and so on, and marching and fighting in the streets and so on. But I mean, how do you see that the right has changed from that until like to where we are now?
That's an interesting question, because at the time there was a lot to complain about in the right, because it in a different way it lacked seriousness. It was subcultural. It was more working class, just like you said. It was very sort of skinhead oriented, I guess, and it was sort of a music subculture. It was very, in that sense, low class. We didn't really have intellectuals. We didn't really have any high quality publications. We had some intellectuals, but they were very few. That was not the basis of the sort of the subcultural movement. It was very youth oriented. Like I said, it was the absence of the older generation. And the reason for the absence of the older generation, I guess, is that the older generation, they didn't have to face the problems of mass immigration in their own daily lives. So they could just, they could close their eyes and drive from the suburb where they lived to whatever workplace, and didn't have to really care about what happened with the younger people or with the rest of society. But when you're young and when you grow up with that in your school, it's sort of in your face all the time. So that's why the younger generation had to react, and they didn't really have any sort of intellectual guidance. They were sort of abandoned by the older generation in that sense. So that is one thing that has changed. So it's more sophisticated now, but it's also in a way more bland. I'll give you one example, and that is that in well, it would have to be 22 years ago or 21 years ago, a Swedish teenager called Daniel Wretström was murdered by a migrant gang. Basically, they cut his throat, and it became a big story in the news. And this resulted in a sort of a large spontaneous protest where nationalists gathered for a sort of a memorial march, I guess, in Stockholm, in a Stockholm suburb. And it was a torch march. This was in early December. So you can imagine, in the snow and the dark and the cold, and people were marching with torches. It had a powerful impression. I was there several times. And it gathered thousands of people. So thousands of people. And this was the boy who was murdered was, I think he was 16 years old. Maybe he was turned 17. I think he was 16. And he was basically a skinhead, tiny guy. But he was on his way home from a party with his friends. And he was alone. And he was basically attacked and murdered by a migrant gang. And so at that time, just 20 years ago, you could gather thousands of people for a torchlit march memorial in Stockholm. Now that would be unthinkable, because now the movement has migrated to the metaverse, and I just don't think that people are serious enough to actually get out into the real world and do anything like that these days. I don't think that changes, that will change society. A torchlit march, but I think it's a symptom of a more sort of action-oriented mentality, and now it has become more passive. It has become more sort of sophisticated, but also more bourgeois and a little bit more bland. And the sort of the irony culture, the online culture is a huge part of that, because I don't think you can really build anything with that culture.
Yeah, it's something that gets talked about time and time again, that we can have these conversations online, but ultimately we have to meet up in real life and get to know each other if we actually want to get something done, even on just smaller scales. Sorry, Ludwig, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm just moving through, like, because you've been one of the people who've been advocating for a higher degree of seriousness in the right wing, and I think you're the one who's coined like the term the Jerry Springer right. I think the Fox Mulder right was I heard you say on one of these shows. So, but I mean, for the people who are not familiar with that, let's just say like the recent stuff that's been happening with Kanye West and Alex Jones, right? That would be a perfect example of some of stuff that's going on in the right wing, where it seems to be just completely turned into like this circus show, or this kind of monetized circus show that you tune into for entertainment, in a sense, and it has no value in terms of realpolitik. You can't accomplish anything. It's just like this freak show that you watch to entertain yourself. But the question is then, what do you think, Fródi, is like the driving force behind this move towards the Jerry Springer right?
Yeah, the Jerry Springer right is a term that I coined because I guess in the 80s, 90s, Jerry Springer was a sort of, for those who might not be familiar with him, it was a trashy talk show, and he was an especially sort of vulgar talk show host. And sometimes he had transvestites on, and they would fight on stage, and people would cheer and jeer, and the audience would get excited. And sometimes he had like Ku Klux Klan or skinheads or something on stage, and just for the sort of the freak show value. Now, my purpose with coining that term is that a lot of people are willing to play into that role, to be that sort of cartoonish villain that Jerry Springer would put on stage so that the audience would boo and get excited. And it's a problem because there are obviously many reasons for that. But one of the reasons, I mean, there are so many reasons for it. One of the reasons is that a lot of people are comfortable in their particular ghetto, in their intellectual ghetto or mind ghetto or whatever you want to call it. That they like being outsiders. They like playing into that persona. And of course, that's not a serious metapolitical movement if that's the purpose, that you just sort of entertain your own whims like that. Another thing is the way that social media is rigged. I've called social media a social credit system that sort of rewards stupidity. Because if you're on social media, you're going to get more interaction the more you dumb down your whatever you do, right? Because it is all a form of entertainment. And I've said this, that the medium degrades the message. And essentially, just the presence on social media degrades everything into trivial entertainment. And so I think social media is a huge part of the problem here, because everything just gets treated as entertainment if it is in social media. And that eradicates elements of the sacred or the seriousness or any kind of devotion, and it degrades everything. And so we're left with this kind of shock jock movement, where people chase clicks and chase validation that way. And it becomes a sort of a downward spiral, because that means that if you get more followers by being a clown, then somehow you're more important than someone who actually does serious work. So a person like Kevin McDonald, who does serious intellectual work, he's of course not as important as someone like Alex Jones, who just acts like a clown and he just creates conspiracy entertainment. But he's more important because that's what people will click on. That's what people will follow. Mm-hmm. And so I think this problem is built into social media to a large extent, and also to the fact that you can hide. I mean, internet anonymity is, some would say, a good thing. I would say to a large extent it's a bad thing, because I saw the transition from when it started, when blogs and all these things started, and people just started hiding behind their anonymity, and they took on a different persona that they wouldn't have in real life, because then they would have to sort of face up to their behavior toward other people. And so I just think that that whole thing creates a dynamic that makes it impossible to have a serious political movement.
Yeah, and I think those are very good points. Sorry, Walrus, did you have a...
No, I was just going to say that's well said. If you have any other comments, Ludwig, I have a couple of super chats that I want to get through real quick.
Yeah, let's read the super chats first.
All right. First off, we have from Falling Outside the Normal Moral Constraints for $5, says, "This is my contribution to your Donald Trump digital card collection fund. Cheers, lads. Thank you for the support." Fjolnir says, "Fródi and my former gym bro of mine are what we in Iceland call Kvíðmagar, or gut brothers. It's a small world." Not sure if he's making that up or if you know someone in Iceland, Fródi, but
I don't know. I have no idea who that is. Who knows? Who knows? Could be. Could be.
It's a small country, but it's not that small, right?
No.
Yeah.
Nordhuger European History and Lore for $5 says, "Glad tidings from your diasporic kin in Minnesota. Thank you, Fródi, for introducing me to the film The Island at the Top of the World."
Yeah, I had American Krogan on the Decameron Film Festival, and we talked about The Island at the Top of the World, which is actually a fascinating film from the 1970s. I think it's 1974, which was when Disney still made some pretty cool films, and I hadn't watched it before, but it's basically an expedition to the North Pole where there's still sort of a Viking community. And the actors speak, well, they have Norwegian and Swedish actors. So it's a pretty cool film. And I mean, if you have kids or something, maybe they'd like to watch it. It's good wholesome entertainment, which you won't find today.
Yeah, I know in our community chat on the Matrix channels, Nordhuger has been posting about that movie, so I've been taking note of it, and I'm probably going to find a copy somehow. So next on our program here, we have another sort of political question, I suppose, which pertains to the far-right political parties in Scandinavia. Now, we have done before, almost a year ago, we did an overview of the sort of political landscape of most of Scandinavia, starting with Norway. And a lot of the far-right political parties there might end up on a bit of the silly side, but what is your opinion of the current options that are out there for people like us?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't really follow party politics. I mean, I take the view that we're in a crisis that's not really going to be changed through party politics or through politics, really, because I think that our crisis is bigger than that. I think that what we need is an overall paradigm shift that happens on an intellectual, philosophical, religious, spiritual level, and those changes take a very long time. And I think that basically party politics and political efforts are, I mean, they can be helpful, but I don't think that is the central or major thing. I think that it's a good thing, for example, when candidates like Donald Trump or others, or the Sweden Democrats for that reason, for that matter, when they stir things up a little bit and create a bit of change in the discourse, that's a good thing. I mean, it's an interesting thing that when I probably started talking about a paradigm shift, that we need a paradigm shift in relation to mass immigration in Sweden. I didn't really hear anyone use that term. I'm not saying that I invented the term or anything like that, but when I talked about the paradigm shift of immigration policy, I didn't hear anyone talk about it. But obviously now, even the Swedish government now talks about a paradigm shift in migration policy. I'm not saying that the people in the government listen to my show or anything like that, but my point is that these kinds of things trickle down. And so these ideas, they start somewhere with people who are interested in ideas. People are interested in intellectual things, which is never the majority, which is already always a sort of a tiny number of people. But then these things spread, and finally they can end up in the government. And so I don't think that these sort of political things are completely wasted, but I don't think that they are the central thing, because I think that they are only important insofar as they change the sort of the meta-political discourse and change the overall attitudes in society. And so I don't really know any sort of radical parties or anything like that. I don't really follow things that closely. So, but as a general thing, I would be of the opinion that it's better to get these sort of milquetoast populist parties in there, because they help spread ideas, and that's their function.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to kind of segue into from that is that you have a party on the far right in Norway. They're probably like they're far outside of the Orden window. I think they're probably also trying to be as far right as they can be. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Like they're called the Alliance, basically Alliansen. They're headed by Hans-Jørgen Lysglimt Johansen, who is sort of a figure that I think he's of the same opinion as you, that he wants to sort of create a type of paradigm shift. But it seems like the effort that he's made in building this party is just so all over the place, in a sense that I don't know if this is constructive in any way, or if he just falls squarely into the Jerry Springer camp. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yeah, I'm familiar with him, and I thought that, I mean, I became familiar with him when he first came onto the stage after the Trump victory, because he was interviewed all over TV in Norway at that time, which was quite astonishing. Because
he was
said
the one guy willing to go go to bat for Donald Trump after
exactly.
he won.
Exactly. So he said some things that were sort of in your face and were good, the good talking points to get out there. I haven't really followed the activities of his political party. I know that it's pretty much a sort of I've gotten the impression that it's pretty much a sort of a one-man show. But I think that also, I'm not going to sort of pretend that I know exactly what's going on with it and so on, but I get the impression that perhaps he involves too many wacky or controversial ideas and so on, and that has a sort of a ghettoizing effect. I mean, it's a cliche basically that, but it's true. It's a true cliche, as many cliches are. But it is a true cliche that if you're controversial on one issue, you can't really afford to be controversial on many other issues without just becoming a weird crank. And so, yeah, if you're going to be serious about something, then you have to sort of pick your fights. And I think perhaps they failed to do that. That they should. I would think that if you want to do a nationalistic party or a right-wing party, you should pick the one issue and just go with that, because being kind of fringe on many issues will just make you, by definition, fringe.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to sum up what's happened to him, because I followed him, I think, before he became TV famous with the Trump stuff, because like he's, a lot older than us, but he's gone through a sort of journey like this kind of, like they talk about the pipelines, like the libertarian to alt-right pipeline and so on. So like he was on YouTube talking about Austrian economics like in 2012, and he was interviewing Ron Paul and stuff like that. And then Trump came along. So he was sort of championing Trump, and then he picked up this sort of name that's the party of the Alliance. That was the party that was actually started by, it was trying to start by Helge Lurås and some of the people in rights.no and so on, as more of this counter-jihad effort. So Then he was doing, so it's like Trump populism and counter jihad. Then he discovered like the alt-right, like the Richard Spencer stuff, that he was getting more into the racial aspect. And then later he seemed to have discovered like Varg Vikernes. So then he became more of an esotericist, to the point where he says that, that there are no political solutions, and this is more of like a religious movement. So it's diverged more into like paganism, actually. And not just any paganism. Like, he seems to now want to ally himself with the Hare Krishna movements. That's basically a Hindu movement. So you start off with a sort of nationalist party, and then it just becomes like this kind of Hindu Kali Yuga party, in a sense, where they're going to chant these sort of Hare Krishna songs. And so it's I'm going to coin the term, trying to finding yourself, right, in a sense, like when you realize you're in opposition to the system, but you don't really know what the opposition is supposed to look like. So you just sort of shop around for all of these kind of strange ideas until you find something that actually sticks. But by the time you found something that seemed like a consistent solution, you're basically so far outside of the Overton window, and you just have so many wacky opinions that you can't be taken seriously by anybody. But yeah, I think that segues nicely into the next topic we want to talk about, which is paganism. Because as I understand it, you are a pagan, or a sort of practicing pagan. Am I right?
Yeah, I am.
So the question then is, like, I mean, is there a particular branch of paganism that you adhere to, like heathenism or Germanic paganism or something, or is
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, paganism is a sort of a problematic term in itself, of course, because it is coined as a pejorative term. I mean, it is coined by Christians about the other. So both heathen and pagan sort of have the same connotations. And although they're sort of termed, I mean, they were coined, of course, they refer to people from the countryside. And I guess, as far as I understand, that the original connotation of that is that these are sort of, whereas Christianity was the big modern new religion in the Roman Empire, and it was like the urban fashionable people, and the people on the countryside still held on to this sort of the old faith. And so the sort of the pagan and heathen both refer to that fact that these are sort of the country bumpkins. Sort of, it has that connotation. So the term itself is a bit problematic, because essentially the only thing it means is non-Christian. And
it's kind of a bit like the word barbarian.
It's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So although it is actually a pejorative term originally, or intended as that, I like it, because those are exactly the aspects of it that I like. Because Christianity is progressive, and the sort of the urban religion and so on. And those are the things that I like about the pagan religion, that it is more decentralized, it is more of the sort of the old ways, and of the people who are not urban and cosmopolitan and so on. And so the problem here is that there is no other term, because religion in itself in pre-Christian times would not really have its own things weren't as compartmentalized in those days. So the sort of the religious practice in pre-Christian times would be taken so much for granted that you wouldn't need a term for it, right? So that's why we're stuck with
part of daily life. Is that what you're saying? That it just weaves into the lives of people without them sort of thinking about it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if there are no other alternatives, then you don't really need a term for what you have. I mean, it's sort of like
yeah.
It's sort of like, some people will say that nationalism was invented in the French Revolution, or it was invented in modern times. Well, not really, but the terms, might be invented
a linguistic
in modern time.
Pointer, yes. But the concept has been around forever. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we're stuck with the term pagan. And as far as which kind of pagan, yeah, I mean, it is natural that you go to your own tradition, and that's sort of the point of it. So for me, it is a Nordic or wider Germanic kind of paganism that I'm attracted to.
Interesting. Now, I have in my notes here from a stream you did on the pagan critique of Christianity over on Academic Agents channel some time ago. And I know that you've vlogged about partaking in rituals. Is there any more you can tell us about sort of how this works? I know that sounds stupid, but hopefully you understand what I'm asking here.
Well, yeah, I could say something about that, I guess, without going into too much detail. But one of the differences is that it is, what separates Christianity is indoors in a church, right? Whereas rituals, pagan rituals, would be more outdoors and at sites that are sacred or connected to the ancestors in one way or another. And there are many different kinds of rituals. Maybe we shouldn't go into all kinds of the details about that, but I mean, one of the classical rituals that everyone uses is the sambal. The sambal is the sort of the it's a ceremonial toast where the participants toast to various things, but so there's like a toast that goes in a circle where you have basically either a horn or something else that you a ceremonial vessel that you use for that purpose. So I mean, there are ceremonies just like in every other religion and the purpose of ceremonies are many, of course, but one of them is to just bring us into the right mindset and to connect us with the things that are outside of our everyday life. I mean, one of the things is that I mean, if you work in an office, if you work in just with everyday trivial things, and you're engaged in your life as usual, then in order to bring your mind to the sacred aspects of reality and the sacred aspects of your life, you use rituals for that to bring you to a different mindset or bring your mind elsewhere to the sort of the higher realm, if you want to call it that.
No, I definitely agree, and it's interesting the things you say about it being more connected to nature, because it is one thing that I've always had sort of taken issue with when it comes to, there's a lot of Christians in these spheres, and I've been semi religiously brought up, but when I'm outside in the woods, and especially now during winter, I find it hard in sort of the deeper recesses of my mind to actually accept what Christianity seems to be offering, and that's not because I cannot bring myself to understand it. It's more, I feel like it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit whatever spirit lives in in the earth and in the bones of my people. I don't know how to put it, but I just can't seem to to make sense of it in any other way than, well, this is something different than Christianity.
Yeah. No, I find that very relatable, and that's also the problem with there's a difficult aspect in talking about these things, because these kinds of changes happen not on a sort of a conceptual or rational or philosophical level first. They happen somewhere else first, and that's why these things like if you're into philosophy, you'll know like the ontological argument for the existence of God. And those are just things that you add on later. There's no one is actually converted to a Christian believer by the ontological argument, And it's the same way here, that it is like your personal experiences. I mean, when I'm in a church, there's nothing sacred there for me, and so I'm not moved. But that doesn't really touch my spirit, my soul, and so it just leaves me cold. Or even a bit uncomfortable, because there is this Christianity, to me, has this slightly depressing, life-denying aspect. If you listen to a preacher, or if you listen to a priest, they have this. There's this aspect of life draining, almost, and that is sort of the opposite of the sacred to me. And so that's why I could never relate to Christianity from a religious aspect either, because it doesn't put me in touch with the sacred.
So I have just a quick question when it comes to like the pagan practice and the pagan ritual. Do you draw upon some specific literature for this?
Well, yes, there's many there are many sources, of course, that you can use, and there is I mean, there are historical sources. There are practices that are alive, that have sort of been an unbroken chain from related religions or related regions, related geographic areas, that you can sort of draw inspiration from, or draw some conclusions from, because I mean, one thing that I'm a firm believer in is that there is the Indo-European religions are deeply connected, or they have the same origin, and of course they took on local expressions in different geographical areas, but still they have the same origin, and some of those religions have had a better chance of survival, shall we say. So they have survived to a greater extent, and so it is a little bit of what has survived in our culture, and what has survived in other cultures that is authentic. And this is the problem with a lot of Christians. They say that if you don't have an unbroken tradition, then it's gone. It doesn't work. And I don't agree with that. That's simply wrong. It's essentially blasphemous, I would say, because, well, for several reasons. Well, for one, we have an unbroken tradition in some respects. I mean, there are many aspects of our lives that have where there's a sort of a thread that goes through all the way back to pre-Christian times. So there are things still, but also that would suggest that what we're doing is not real. It would suggest that we're just making it up, because if it is something real out there, and the point is to bring you in touch with the sacred, if you want to call it that. You can call it God, you can call it what you want. It doesn't really matter what word you use. But the point is that if the sacred is real, then does the sacred go away if your particular tradition? I mean, it's a very anthropocentric way of looking at things, that we are the important thing here, that that this is something that the sacred depends on us rather than the other way around. And so if there are sacred aspects of reality, then we can get in touch with them, and we can, or shall we say, awaken our senses to them. And that is the purpose of religion, as I see it. The purpose of religion is to awaken our consciousness or awareness of the sacred aspects of reality. And the sacred aspects are there, whether we are conscious of them or not. And so the fact that we forget something doesn't mean that thing goes away. And so this is my problem with this whole argument, suggesting that if you don't have an unbroken tradition of priests like the Catholic Church, then the sacred disappears. No, that's a very anthropocentric way of looking at things, and it's kind of doesn't make any sense at all.
So I have another question. I mean, do you believe in trying to convert people, or do you think this is just something, it's like a calling that people are called into, and if they get it, they get it, and if they don't understand that, there's kind of no point in trying to talk to people about it or trying to bring them into the fold?
No, I don't believe in any sort of missionary work. I think that is one of the problematic things about Christianity, that it does have missionary work at its core, and so no, I don't think that there's any huge necessity for that. But of course, I mean, you would want to talk to people, and if people are interested and so on. But I mean, an active missionary work, no, and I don't see it either as sort of an attempt to create a sort of a mass movement based on that either. So that is something that is private, and that has to be private in order to be genuine, because I don't really think that there's any point in trying to force it upon other people. It's not a political thing. First and foremost, it is a sacred religious thing. It is a personal thing, and of course, I mean, you would spread it in an organic way to your family or your whatever close friends and so on. But any kind of mass missionary work, I think, is completely pointless.
That's a good answer, but because that goes into one of these questions that we had from the Element chat, where they'd asked, how the succession would work, like within this pagan contest, like how would the children be initiated into this?
Yes, I think that's that's natural. I mean, that's the whole point as well. I mean, because it is a sort of it's not an individualistic thing. It is something that is it has a form of ancestor worship aspect to it, because this is life is something that you get from your ancestors. You get basically everything that's worth having. That's what you get from your ancestors, and there's a celebration of continuity and not of this sort of atomized individual. That's at the center of it. That is what is sacred. That is there's a continuity that is sacred. And there's a problem, just like you said, when people ask these questions from a Christian point of view. The difficult thing in talking about these things is that everyone has a Christian template in their minds when they're talking about religion. And so they think that, okay, let's just take Christianity, but let's just exchange the figures in Christianity for other figures, and then we're left with what we're talking about, be it sort of Germanic heathenism or anything else. But no, it's not. It's a completely different thing. It's a completely different thing. So you can't just take Christianity as a template and just change the details, because then you wouldn't have any good chance of understanding what's going on. So I think you have to sort of look at it as completely separate, and not really, it doesn't follow the model that Christianity follows.
Yeah, that makes sense. Real quick before we move on, I have another super chat here that I just want to get out of the way from Fjolnir for 1,500 Icelandic kroner, which I think is about $10. I am the Lorax, and I speak for the trees, and the trees say all of nature exists to glorify the creator. Stop hugging and worshipping us, you hippie. I get an idea. I sense that Fjolnir might be a Christian. So the next thing that we wrote here is going to be a bit of maybe a lightning round of other pagan quote-unquote branches. And the notes here says what pagan branches are cringe and which parts are useful. And the first branch is Hinduism. Do we have any thoughts here?
Well, Hinduism is sort of a wide thing. It is a lot of different things, but I take a great interest in it. I think it's very useful, and it's very relatable. It's obviously related to our own sort of native worldview. So I think it's extremely useful to read sources from India and so on. Yeah.
A lot of the old perennials have a tendency to end up in Hinduism and other Eastern influences eventually as well. Now, Ludwig, you wrote goddess movement here. I have no idea what that is.
No, this is basically the sort of matriarchal religion, right? You have I mean, they fall within the pagan parasol, so to speak. But yeah, I could sort of assume your opinion already on this. But I mean, is this something you have experience with, Fródi?
No, I don't have experience with it. I guess you mean something like Wicca or something like that, or
No, yeah, I think it's the Mother Earth kind of worshiping the sacred female.
yeah, no.
I have
You know,
no
if you
idea
get to
what
like
this is.
real esoteric feminism, we did a stream on Wilhelm Reich and a lot of these other people, and like some of these people get deep into the idea of the woman god, essentially, like the Mother Earth that needs to be worshipped. You know, Bronze Age pervert talks about like the Longhouse and the worship of the feminine. I think it goes a bit under the same umbrella.
Yeah, no, I don't really have much to say about that. I mean, there are many sort of modern sort of things that are made up in the 70s or 60s in very recent times that are, you know, people can do that if they like, but that's not really. That tends to be more of a sort of a philosophy or I don't know. Yeah, or like a political thing or something, and that's not the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly hard not to trip over all of the sort of like new age pagan light movements that are out there. So the next up we have, it's heathenry, but it's Germanic paganism. Now that is something that might have a bit more relevance towards our traditions.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that is. I mean, that's a. I guess a wider concept than the sort of the Nordic, I guess. But the Nordic is a part of the Germanic, and I see it as you know, largely one big thing. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that I find relatable.
You wrote druidry here, Ludwig Path, and I suppose
Yes,
that's mostly for the British
well,
Isles.
that is the British Isles and the Celts and so
Yeah.
on. What do you think about that, Fródi?
Well, I don't really think too much about it. No, I haven't really taken a huge interest in that. So I don't think I can speak much about it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. We're just trying to sort of scrape the surface here to see if we can try to use your answers on some of these to outline the position elsewhere, right?
That's fine.
Next up is eco-paganism. Again, I have no idea what that is, Ludwig Path.
No, it's just stuff that I found on Wikipedia, honestly. But it really is like this, the idea of nature worship, and it's usually connected like with environmental activism and so on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is, I don't really see the sort of the religious or pagan aspects of that. So I think that's a completely different issue. I mean, I naturally I'm very sympathetic to the sort of the eco movement and the I'm very much a sort of I don't know, primitivist or something. I'm not in favor of the sort of the urban, high tech, cosmopolitan machine taking over everything. So I'm very much in favor of that, but I don't really see the parallels to religion. Well, I guess there are parallels to religion, because it would seem obvious to me that people living in concrete blocks away from the soil they grew out of, that they are more disconnected from everything that's sacred, and that's a part of the sort of the source of the alienation and the nihilism of the modern world, is this kind of urban living apart, you know, away from our natural environment.
Yeah. It seems a bit of a roundabout way to end up at similar position, when you could sort of just try to look at the traditions of old and see what you can resurrect, I think. The last one is Wicca. Now I know some people in the chat already have derailed Wicca as pretty much the crazy cat lady religion, and they're also the ones that tend to pop up when there's talk about paganism in mainstream media, I think. What is your assessment of that movement?
Well, I don't really have much to say about it. I guess it's a modern movement. It's a modern. I don't really know that it's a pagan movement. It's more like an occult thing that is connected with Aleister Crowley and those kinds of people. So I don't really think that it has much relevance for what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
I mean that's just another completely
That makes
separate
sense.
thing.
No. Luddic Path, why don't you go ahead and I'll collect a couple of super chats for afterwards.
Yes. So there, I remember back there was an academic agent video where he was talking about like how many dissidents are in Europe and UK and so on, and he was talking about how do you actually quote unquote measure who is a dissident, and the criteria that he came up with that was like the hot most recent criteria was whether the person had sort of refused to take the mandatory medication that was forced on people in 2020 and 2021, and whether people had taken a sort of either neutral stance to the Ukraine or a pro-Russia stance to the Ukraine. And like one of the things that struck me with that metric is that that basically means that most people who are into New Age would count as hardcore dissidents. And I don't think that's an entirely wrong assertion when I look at the way the media has been treating some of the New Agers recently. Because I mean, I've always thought of them as like this very harmless movement that just existed in the peripheries and things. But now I see that their beliefs have become a lot more, they're a lot more dangerous, I think, to the current regime than they have been previously. But the question, Fródi, is that, I mean, what do you think about this sort of soft merger, as kind of soft alliance between some more of these neo-pagans and the New Agers? Because like with the like the political party, the Alliance, and Hans-Jørgen Lysglimt Johansen, he seems to think that like that's the way forward to try to bring in all of the New Age people into like this sort of pagan community and so on for a political alliance.
Well, I don't know that they have much political agency. I have to say those criteria were a bit weird for saying who's a. I mean, well, I guess dissident can mean anything. So I guess that's a sort of a slightly pointless, as I would see it. But any political alliances with New Agers, no, I don't really see any point in that, because I think that they are largely lack any political influence or any political vision or any that kind of agency. But I do have a lot of sympathy for them. I think that they a lot of the sort of the New Age and also the hippies and so on, I think that they reacted to reacted against many of the same problems that I've reacted against, or that we've reacted against. So I can sympathize with their sentiments. I think that they're probably they're sort of channeling their sort of their ideas or their sentiments in a pretty much misguided way. But I can sympathize with them because I mean, even in the 1800s, or the sort of the folkish movement in Germany and so on, they had sort of a hippie movement and even nudists and so on, that were basically reacting against the sort of homogenizing machine that is the modern urban industrial world. And so I think that they see a lot of the same problems, but they have different solutions or different ways forward. And I think that they are pretty much feminine in their sort of mentality. So I don't think that they have a very practical
I would
mind
say
in
that
terms
they lack the tools to see a way forward, rather than that they see a different
Yeah.
one. but that's
Exactly,
just my
exactly.
opinion.
No, exactly. It just becomes a form of escapism. But I can definitely sympathize with them in the sense that they see the same problems, and so I have a lot of sympathy actually for the sort of the hippie movement as well. I know where they're coming from, but obviously they don't have any solutions.
No, I think that one of the biggest problems with the New Agers would be like the rampant solipsism in their movement, right? A lot of them are so incredibly self-absorbed, and they, believe in all of these ideas like a self-generated universe and so on. It's not very easy to to make a political strategy from the secret, right? So, but the what I see is interesting about them is that it seems to be a lot of people who are in the top of society. I mean, not in the technocratic class, but I think in terms of like the old money and like with certain old industry millionaires and so on that are actually sort of secretly into a lot of this new age esoteric stuff. At least that's what I've noticed, and they try to go a little bit under the radar there. So maybe that's something interesting to look into. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of very wealthy people have pretty kooky ideas, and that's an interesting thing because a lot of people, especially in right-wing circles, they have a very sort of conspiratorial way of looking at what's going on. They think that everything is planned out in detail by these elites and wealthy people and so on. And I think that kind of overestimates those people because they tend to have a lot of kooky ideas, and not everyone who is wealthy or influential is very sort of bright in that respect.
That's fair. Before we go on, I have a couple of super chats that I want to highlight. Madeline Brooks for $5 says, "Can Fródi recommend the best way to discover resources and community of pagan traditions are not remembered within living family elders? Many thanks." No, I don't know where Madeline Brooks lives, so I suppose we'll have to keep it a bit general.
Yeah, I don't really know. Is it books? I guess I'm drawing a blank now. I mean, there's there's so many resources, but of course, when you get a question like this,
Where
it's
do you
very
start?
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'd
The-
have to get back to that. I guess the sort of the sources, or just reading the sort of the I mean, what I find most rewarding is often reading the sagas and reading like older stories and older sources, because they have a flavor of that worldview taken for granted in a way. And so I don't really like to approach things um, from the most abstract perspective. I have a speech that's on YouTube actually called Paganism as Metaphysics, where I talk about this at a more sort of higher philosophical level, the differences between Christianity and paganism. So anyone watching this could sort of look for that. That's a yeah. I mean, if you're interested in more like theoretical aspects, which I tend to think are perhaps less important, because I think that the sort of the concrete lived experience is more important. But there are philosophical aspects for sure.
Is there any, you mentioned community as well. Is there any sort of central or any sort of compilation of contacts or stuff for people who are interested in
Yeah, I
either
would say that
joining or building their own?
I would say that the AFA have something very credible going on. It's ironically it's American, because I say ironically because we usually think of America as sort of the sort of leading the sort of the cosmopolitan transformation of our society, and the sort of,
Yeah.
so I guess it's somewhat ironic in that respect. But there's the Asatru Folk Assembly, the AFA, is led by was founded by a man named Steve McNallen. I think they have a lot of good stuff going on, and I think that they exist in many different countries. So that would be probably the thing that's very much in line with my way of looking at things. Now, I don't really know the details. I'm not personally involved, but I can sympathize with a lot of the things that they represent.
Right, so hopefully that's something for Madeline to go on. Fjolnir for 750 Icelandic kroner with a challenge here saying paganism is for people who cannot understand metaphysics. If you're going to reject Christ, at least be a Platonist. Would you care to take him on, Fródi, or?
Well, yeah, Platonism is as a religion, Platonism would be a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution. Platonism is entirely built on abstractions. I mean, I can sympathize with a lot of aspects of Platonism in philosophy, but in religion, I think it's essentially an anti-religion in many ways. I'm not a Platonist in a religious sense. I mean, I've spent many years studying philosophy. So I've taken a great interest in Plato. So I'm not rejecting Plato, is what I'm trying to say. But as a religious guide, no, not really. I mean, Platonism. I mean, Socrates was killed, was executed for blaspheming the gods. I think that it's probably a misguided way to start if you want to find any religion outside. And also I think that Platonism is very much in line with Christianity in many respects, much more in line with Christianity than with Indo-European religion or Indo-European paganism.
Right.
Yeah, I have to agree there. I mean, we did the stream on the two episodes on the Open Society where we cover a little bit of Karl Popper's Open Society and its enemies, and he seems to, have the exact same views in that the fundamentalist Christianity, as we understand it now, is very much influenced by the Platonic view, in a sense of the perfect form that just continuously degenerates over time. So, if we don't have any more super chats, we have like
I just
two
wanted
more
to
questions.
add one more comment here from Sunason in the chat regarding the Madeline Brooks comment. He recommends that you can start with the Havamal. And I'm not sure if that's the correct way to start, but we did talk about that a couple of weeks ago. We did chapter 2 of our Scandinavian or Nordic history streams, in which we took a bit of a more cultural look at the Viking Age instead of the BBC, typical BBC documentary talking about all the raids. And I think me and Leo Borealis came to the conclusion that at some point we're going to just do a Havamal stream where we're just reading from the stanzas there and commenting on them. But I don't know if that is a good way to start, Fródi. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's a lot of life wisdom in there, and I mean, it's not a bad read, but it's the Eddas are great, but I'm not really sure that they. I mean, there's a difference between mythology and religion or religious practice, and so on. So. And I think that sometimes a lot of people get the impression that it's that mythology is all there is, and I think that is because of the influence of Christianity. That so much, I mean, Christianity is based on scripture, right? So much based on scripture, and that's simply not the case outside of Christianity, right? So yeah, I mean, just because people have a Christian sort of framework in their mind, they think that okay, well. Where's
the Bible equivalent I can start reading? Yeah.
yeah. The pagan Bible would be the Eddas. Not really. I mean, the Eddas contain poems and stories inspired by that, but there is no Bible in that sense, and so that's something that people should keep in mind, that there is no sort of central authority in the same sense as there is in Christianity. So yeah.
Okay, Ludwig Path, you had a couple of questions that
yes, we did get one of the element questions in, but there are two more questions. The first one here, I can sort of infer based on what you've said, Fródi, what you're going to answer, but I'm going to let you answer yourself. So the question is, what are the best ways for traditional Christians and traditional pagans to ally in our quest to restore Nordic heritage and sovereignty?
I don't really think that that's a problem. I mean, because that's it's not a problem outside of Christianity. Christianity has a sort of a duty to convert other people, and so there is always that impulse in Christians, I think, and so that creates these sort of debates or these constant discussions. But I mean, that what we're dealing with there is a political question that doesn't really have to be religious. I think it has to be spiritual to some extent, but you don't have to really get into the specifics of religion. Insofar as, I mean, you can cooperate or you can see eye to eye on political issues, on many political issues, without getting into religious debates. I guess the problem is when there are some of these sort of Christian nationalists who think that, well, the whole project is about restoring Christianity, because then that will sort of take care of everything. And I don't think that's the case at all. So I guess the best way to create cooperation is to set those specific issues aside, and I mean, there are many specific issues, or there are many concrete issues in politics that I think everyone can agree on, and so if you see it as a purely political project, then I don't think you have to get into religious debates, but they tend to pop up anyway. So I'm not really sure that they can be avoided, because they tend to be very central to people's worldviews, and so I'm not really sure we can avoid them at all.
Yeah, because I think on the other side, like you said, you have the Christians who want to convert the other parts, but you also have pagans who basically think that Christianity is the problem in a sense. So that also makes it difficult to have any good alliances. But let's see. There's a last question here. So, what level of integration that is possible or desirable between Germanic paganism, like the Wotan or the Nimble Ungenlied, and Norse paganism, like the Poetic Edda, Othin, Snorre, and what about Finnish, Kalevala? Is that what it's called? Yeah, Finnish Kalevala stuff. Can that be integrated? Yeah, Kalevala. so yeah, that's the question. The integration between Germanic paganism, Norse, and Finnish Kalevala, is it useful, desirable? Can it be integrated?
I think there's a bit of a difficult question, because I don't think that there is like an overarching project of moving religion in a certain direction. I think these things happen organically, and I can't really say that I know too much about Finnish. I mean, the Kalevala was written down in the late 19th century, I think, and I mean that's also sort of I guess poetry, mythology, epic in many ways, or maybe not epic, but like folk stories. I mean, it's a sort of it's all kinds of different things. So I can't really speak with any expert knowledge about Finnish pre-Christian religion. And like I said, I don't really think that there's like a top-down attempt to come up with like some kind of synthesis or anything like that. I think these things happen much more organically. And yeah, I can't really give a better answer than that. I don't think that there are any such projects of combining different elements of religion.
Yeah, nice. I think that's all of the element questions. So if there's more super chats, we can take those, and maybe then we'll finish up.
Yes, Jolnir is back again for 750 Icelandic kroner, and he says, so we should derive our truth from the trees and dead ancestors instead of conceptualizing absolute truth, and structure society accordingly.
Well, yeah, this is the thing here, that there's a confusion between within Christianity. There's a sort of religion and philosophy is mixed up, and I would say that you get pretty bad religion and pretty bad philosophy. So I mean, you end up with the sort of the medieval schoolmen who were basically court philosophers, which is sort of the sort of medieval version of, I guess, gender studies that we have today, which is sort of you try to shoehorn your religious perspective into science and philosophy and so on. I think it sort of yields a pretty shaky result, to say the least. So I don't think that the purpose of religion is to create those kinds of utopian projects of finding the ultimate truth and try to reshape the world accordingly. I think that kind of utopianism is a part of the problem. I think that is something that runs through Christianity and communism and even the kinds of things that we have today, where basically our elites today have similar kinds of sort of utopian projects where they think that by micromanaging society, they can sort of get rid of all the evils of viruses and climate problems, or whatever they want to call it. They can change the temperature and so on. And I think that kind of utopianism of trying to find your utopia and then try to force the world into that model always ends with these kinds of crazy results. And the sort of the solution becomes worse than the problem. And so I just think that there's a difference between that kind of Platonic philosophy. There's a difference between that and religion. And I would say that religion is very much the opposite, really, of that kind of philosophy. Because religion is a sort of acceptance of the world, and sort of it is a sort of an awareness of the sacred aspects of reality. It's not really a utopian project. So I think that's the problem. That's one of the problems with Christianity, because it becomes a sort of a political, philosophical, scientific, religious thing all baked into one, and it becomes this weird kind of project that has led us here.
All right, I think that is enough infighting for one night. Ludwig Path, do you have anything more you would like to add?
No, I think we got through all of the questions.
Okay,
so
very
again, big thanks to Fródi for coming on. I think this is a really good stream and a lot of good conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I had a pleasure, and I hope you got what you want out of the interview. And I'd be happy to talk to you guys anytime. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no, this was enlightening, and as I said, it's touched on it a little bit. It's one of those things that have been in the back of my mind for a while, where when the Christians describe what they can, what they have to offer, so to speak, it doesn't sit quite right with me. There's something else going on there, and it seems to me that might be the same thing that you're talking about. So, oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to agree. Yeah, I think that's sort of how these things start. That, I mean, it is something that you relate to in one way or another, and I don't think that it's really a philosophical debate to begin with. I think the philosophical debate comes afterwards.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Fródi, is there anything you would like to share with potential viewers? Any recent appearances or something they should be aware of?
Sure. I was on Millennial a couple of days ago. Millennial is the sort of an annual Christmas festival, I guess. A bunch of people are interviewed on millennial woes on Odyssey. So my appearance is there. And like I said, you can find me on Telegram. I post updates every day, basically. And I have a weekly show called Weekly Roundup with Mark Webber, which is a weekly show on current events and news commentary and so on. That's also available on Odyssey, on my channel. So if you want to follow my work, you can just go there. I have hundreds and hundreds of videos and interviews and recordings and stuff. So I guess Telegram and the website, of course, and Odyssey are probably the best places to find most of my work.
Right, fantastic. For my own sake, I had a conversation a day and a half ago with a friend of the channel, Jay Burden. So if anyone listening to this is interested, you can just head over to his channel, and that video should be up. We're talking about what the hell happened to Jordan Peterson. We're talking a bit about how right-wingers should relate to women, if at all, and other smaller topics. It's just a fun little conversation for about an hour. Bloody Pat, you have anything you want to add before we get out of here?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. We might have to reschedule next week's and this year's final episode for the Wednesday, so watch out for that. I'll try to put that out on the relevant channels if that happens. Until then, have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.